Good morning. I'm Michael Burns, and I call the meeting of the Fargo Historic Preservation Commission for October 16th to order. First item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from our September 18th meeting. Any comment? Is there a motion to approve?
Make a motion to approve the minutes for prior meeting.
Is
I'll
there?
second.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. All right, the Historic Overlay District review of the Jefferson neighborhood. Any updates, Kelly?
Yeah, so last month this was presented to you by our consultants, SRF, and at that time, your commission decided to table it for further review and make some comments on it. We had met with Paul Glass, staff had met with Paul to go over his comments. So incorporated in the packet are his comments. And that's pretty much the newest updates. It's pretty simple things. I don't know, Paul, if you want to speak to the comments you made.
I really had no substantive issues. It was a matter of terminology and repetition of things that didn't need to be repeated, and I think some clarification of terms that were not entirely clear, but if you look through the document, I think it's pretty easy to see what the changes are from.
So I notice in, in the copy that I have, I've got text in blue and in red. So which is new and which is any change from the last time?
The red is the new.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I assume that you reviewed this carefully with the staff. And
Yes, we did, and I think that the concerns that I had with the terminology and organization were taken care of.
okay.
I read through it as well, and I agreed with the changes that Paul had made.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Is there a motion to approve it as corrected?
Also move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Next item on the agenda is the property at 16 8th Street South. Before we get into that, I just want to note that the 506 Broadway North, or Cowboy Jacks, the project that we reviewed last month, has been withdrawn. Did they give you a reason?
No, I don't have a reason. They just sent an email saying that they would like to withdraw their project at this time.
Okay. They didn't give you, are they going to permanently withdraw it from the program? Is that?
I believe that's their intent.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. If there's a member or of the ownership here, please step forward and identify. Yeah, it's fine if you sit at the table. Just identify yourself, please.
Good morning. I'm Joel Jager, property owner of the subject property, 16 8th Street South.
Just want to go ahead and introduce your item.
Yeah, thanks for considering our application, and good morning at 8 o'clock.
Good morning.
A few faces I recognize, I think. We've done a couple of projects like this downtown. Some of you weren't on the committee a few years ago when we did the first one, but we were known as the people with Big Blue, the old Mr. Money building in between Toasted Frog and Sammy's Pizza on the corner there. So that was the first ugly duckling that we dealt with, and we've got another for your consideration this morning. This particular property, if you're familiar with the first block of 8th Street that is just south of Main Avenue, that historic block right there, we actually own a property and did a storefront at 18 8th Street when we first started investing in downtown Fargo. Did not do a Renaissance Zone project or a storefront project on that particular one, but it was actually our first ugly duckling. We just didn't request funds to work on that one, but cleaned that up. And subsequently to that, the owner of 16 8th Street came to us and asked if we'd purchase that property, and it was in pretty rough condition at the time that we bought it. And heretofore, having nothing to do with this application, we have renovated that property, the upstairs portion of it, so there's 3 stories and there's 4 apartments upstairs, and we have spent a lot of time and treasure, so to speak, cleaning that up, and we think it would be a significant upgrade to the block if we could look at doing the storefront on this particular property. So this is an oldie but a goodie, so to speak. This is a property that was built in 1912. It was originally built for the Northwestern Telephone Exchange Company, and years ago was referred to as the Dakota Building. And that organization ultimately became part of the Ma Bell organization, subsequently AT&T. Years after, there was a duplicating business in it, so it was an important part of the printing industry that was common in downtown Fargo. There were a number of spots like that. And then since, I guess it's been 1965 is my memory, it's been home to the Moeller Barber College. And so for a lot of guys in this town, myself not necessarily included, that's kind of a big deal. Kind of a historic business in its own right. It originally opened around the corner, and the business has been intact and will celebrate its 95th year in business today. And so that's the tenant that we inherited when we purchased the property a few years ago, and they continue to train barbers. And so I was actually going to bring it. This is not necessarily relevant to the application, and I had this printed out, and I forgot to bring it. But it's kind of a cool old photo, if you could see it, of a bunch of old barbers being trained up that ultimately went and did barber shops, many of them all over town. So most people in Fargo probably have some connection, again, myself not included, back to this property. So relatively straightforward. I don't know do they have the pictures that were in the application? You can see kind of if you want to flip to those real quickly, kind of what the property originally looked like on the left-hand side there. That picture from 1954 that we got from the NDSU archives, and then what it looks like today, and frankly has looked like since kind of the 60s era. And so you can see on the front there, they've added some kind of faux stonework for the knee wall, and those windowed areas are not original. They're encasements, they're display areas for at one time product, and now I think they stick some rather dated Christmas decorations in there at Christmas time, and so you can tell it's got kind of a Jetsons feel to it, so to speak. It's not exactly what it looked like originally, and so relatively straightforward project. We'd just like to bring it back to what it was originally. You can see in the photo from 1954, if you look at the very left side, originally the staircase and the entrance that went up to the apartments was over on the left, and that was subsequently moved, and it sits inside kind of behind the encasement presently. And we just like to restore that so it is back to the original look, and then we would remove that sign. And behind that sign, there's a rather large cavity that was originally windows, as you can see from the older photo. And so we would seek to basically put it, for the most part, back to glass. And you can see a rendering of it on the second page of the attachment to essentially what we'd be looking to do.
Okay, thank you. I have a first question. What's the grant request amount?
Remember?
It was, the bid that we got was just under $30,000, so I think it might be in here, but it's $14,900 and change. So it was just a few dollars short of the $15,000 max.
Thank you.
I can pull up that exact
No,
number if you
that's-
need it.
That's fine.
I can see that.
Anybody have any comments? I have quite a few.
A quick question in regards to the storefront systems finish, with not having a color photo of what it was. What is the finish you're intending to use?
It'd be painted. We understand that it's non-anodized, and so it would be painted and compliant with all of the requirements. Very similar to what we did down here on 3rd Street, or excuse me, on 303 Broadway.
So after all, you attribute to the longevity of Moeller Barber College, they're not going to be a tenant any longer?
No, they will continue to be a tenant. They, when we purchased the property, they had just signed, they were maybe 9 months into a 10-month lease, and I believe that they're now 5 years into that. There's 4.5 or 5 years left on that lease. And the proprietor, I don't know if you folks know the history of that business, but there's another barber shop that's right on Main Avenue called Everett's, which is a very cool place. And the original, or the more recent owner of the Barber College business that currently operates on 8th Street was Everett. He would be the grandfather of the two young ladies that have Everett's, the barber shop on Broadway. And it's their mother, and so it would have been Everett's daughter-in-law that has been operating the Barber College for, I don't know, the last 20 years, I think that it is. And she, Mary Cannon is her name, and she established the lease with the gentleman that we purchased the property from to basically coincide with her retirement. And she, I hope I'm not letting big news out of the bag on her behalf, but she had originally told me that it was likely that one of her daughters may come back and take over that business when she transitioned into retirement here in about 5 years, and I think subsequently they've decided they want to stay put, and there's another gentleman that has operated a Barber College in the St. Cloud area under the same brand that has been working in conjunction with Mary and may be interested in purchasing that property and keeping it, not the property, the business, the franchise essentially, I think is how it operates, and continuing to operate that. So it's certainly possible that they would continue to operate. And barber schools and barber shops in general, there's a relatively significant investment in the equipment that's inside, the chairs and those kinds of things. And so if there was someone to take it over, it would be a strong consideration to keep it. Was that responsive, ma'am, to your question?
Yeah, I just wondered, you were taking the sign down.
Yeah, the sign just isn't the most updated thing. And the clientele that I think they want to attract, both in terms of students and the people that come in and get their hair cut, they want to do a little bit of updating to the interior of the space. That wouldn't have necessarily anything to do with us, and certainly nothing to do with the grant process. But the business would certainly stay intact, and I think it would just be new signage. I think it would have a retro kind of flavor, so to speak, in the red, white, and blue.
You can't get much more retro than
Well,
what's up there.
a good point, but maybe 1920s retro instead of 1960s retro.
That signage, would it be, I guess going back to the storefront itself, the original shows spandrel, blank out panels above, but your elevation doesn't show what would be spandrel. The rendering does show glass.
We would typically, and we'd certainly be open to your input on this, our preference would be clear glass, so that that area can be utilized either by the Barber College or someone else someday if they choose not to move into it as merchandising space. And I think, I actually spoke with there's an older gentleman that walks his dog on the block, and so I've encountered him several times as we've been doing renovations, because we've got the property next door, and so I've talked to him about some of the lack of it. He didn't think it was actually spandrel, he thought it was painted in the picture that which is not terribly different, but he thought it was actually someone from the inside painting it. At one point in time, it actually had kind of window wells to the basement, and there was a way to get in the basement off the front, and those are now in what would essentially be the right-of-way, and so we probably wouldn't look to put those back there. The building actually extends under the sidewalk as it is presently, but that's originally how the conversation with him got started, and we talked about that. But yeah, it would be generally just for the amount of light that we can get through into the space. We'd prefer to do it in clear glass.
I've got a few comments or questions. The attachment number 2, I'm curious to know what those flat, apparently glazed pieces that look like they're laying on the sidewalk in front of the entrance. I realize that this is just an imported rendering, but what do those, where the only significance I could relate to would be that window well issue, but you can't do that. So I was just curious to know why they ended up on that image.
Mostly just to have a solid structure to attach to on account of that window well issue where it is hollow underneath, and so we need to get a solid foundation, so to speak, and something that we can make square. That piece of concrete right there on the sidewalk has been ground off a couple of times, is what it looks like, so that it can shed water. And so as much as anything, it was putting in blocking and then wrapping it aesthetically so that we can have something so we can get the windows plumb.
Well, it looks to me like it projects out into the right-of-way.
We want to step over it?
Yeah, or you're going to trip over it
I
walking.
think there's some confusion. This is actually a superimposed photo,
I understand that, yeah.
but this isn't what,
But these that I'm questioning.
right, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're showing in this superimposed photo is not what's actually going to happen precisely in the elevation.
Yeah, I see the confusion, and thanks for pointing it out. You're exactly on it. If you flip back one page, you can see that the entry door in the center, the picture on the right-hand side, is recessed significantly into the space. And you can see on the older photo that similarly the center entry and the one on the left-hand side that goes up the stairs to the apartments is also recessed. And I think
I
that's
don't think
not...
that's what we're necessarily
No.
speaking of. It's the toe kick, basically, is projecting in this photo.
Attachment 2.
You
Yeah,
took the current Kitson retail building and
Right.
superimposed on there.
Correct.
That's for an aesthetic, I'm assuming, not an actual, this is what you're going to build precisely.
Yeah, that's correct. That happens to be another property that we own, and so I had him base his measurements on the glass off of that because it happens to tie in the same height to the I-beam up at
Sure,
the
so now
top.
when we go to this one, this lower portion the knee wall
is
flat,
flush.
flush with
Correct.
the storefront itself.
Correct. Yeah, sorry about the confusion on that.
Well, I'm concerned about especially since you've got that photograph from 1954, that gives you a lot of information, I think, in terms of proportion and detail and the size of things. I would say the transom glass would probably be an obscure glass of some kind, which will be a translucent glass, not a complete clear glass. The storefront windows, too, will be a clear glass, which is a good choice. And then the knee wall, basically in the old days, served as a stool for window displays and that sort of thing. So I would encourage you to check on the heights of those. Typically, they're a little higher than 10 inches off the walk.
Sure.
The other thing is the size of the pieces at the corners of where your doors recess. It would be nice if you could get something more, a thinner profile so that you're not looking at a 4-inch square, but I realize if this is stock aluminum, that it's probably likely that you're going to end up having to use a 4-inch frame there. You have to make sure, too, it looks to me like the door that goes into the old stairwell doesn't accommodate ADA, so you have to make sure that you've got the space to allow for that.
Sure.
And I don't think you'll have the same trouble with the main entrance because it appears that you've got enough dimension there.
Correct.
And then, is there a reason why you didn't choose, it looks to me like from the 54 picture that the recessed main entrance is actually set back at an angle.
Yeah, that was, I think we can do it. There's been some modification internally, and a lot of it is we got to get that sign off of there and see what structurally they've changed underneath it, and so we're a little bit limited without upsetting the tenant's business on what we can see at this point in time. The property next door, I have a pretty good hunch that from what we found when we tied into that, what we're going to find, and so I think we probably can get to that angle, which would be my preference because it would tie much more closely to what it originally was.
Yeah, and, typically that's, especially when you've got a good older photograph to
Sure.
base your proposed design on. I think that's something that you should strive to not necessarily replicate exactly, but do your best to give the same general impression.
Absolutely.
That probably does it for my comments. Oh, you do talk about some concrete work. I assume that concrete work will be to provide a small ramp from the right-of-way up to the door for access, handicap access too.
Unlike the properties that we've got on the other side of the street, where there is a significant step up, this one is actually at grade. And so I don't think that would be
Okay.
any kind of a problem to accommodate ADA on this one.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Is there any indication as far as what the condition of the brick might be? It looks like a scratch coat on the left-hand side of the building. Is there any indication what that brick might look like there? Or do you anticipate doing some brickwork, I think?
Are you referring to the silver thing on the
Yes.
left-hand side of the
Yeah.
earlier picture? You can actually see on the right-hand side, I actually used to live in the apartment in the adjacent building, and one night during one of our 60-mile-an-hour windstorms coming down 8th Street, the silver piece on that right-hand column blew off, and so I was down there at 3 in the morning trying. I didn't own the property at the time, but I was afraid it was going to go through his window.
Okay.
And so on the right-hand side, there's a few bullet holes in it, so to speak, a few screw holes where they may have hung that paneling. That's easy to repoint and swap out a brick or two. And so I actually expect, I haven't torn it off on the left-hand side, but I expect that it'll be in similar condition. It was covered up at the same time as the one on the right. The one on the right's been off for less than 3 years, is my memory. I can't remember when that happened. You know, just about that, because it was right before we purchased the property. But it's, the property, you can't see it in the picture, but immediately to the south that we also own, we had to reface that with brick and match it as closely as we could, because it was torn up. It had an awful lot of mastic on it, and it was to a point where nobody in town thought if we put pressure on it with sand, we could even keep it, and so we refaced it and tried to make it as close as we could to what was original. I don't think we will need to do that on this one. It's in pretty good shape, and I've got a good mason that we've worked with that if it comes to that, we can get that back in shape. Good question, thank you.
You brought up a good point with the ADA requirement on this. You're going to need your pull side.
Right.
That really. So on your elevation, you spoke earlier about the apartment access entry. In order to use that as a compliant ADA door, you'll need to have a pull side 12-inch, I believe, to that right side. That's going to adjust your mullion layout. I'm just wondering if it wouldn't suit this to lay out in a more regular interval, then basically just lay it out,
Just shift it
between there.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's what I was going to suggest, is that there are enough changes that I would recommend on this drawing that I think I would recommend that it be redone.
Resubmit it, sure.
Yeah, I don't know if we actually have to resubmit it to us, but definitely to planning, and we could handle it through an email vote too if we want to review and weigh in on it, rather than making you wait till next month. So that's what I would encourage you to do. And
Okay.
I'm glad to give you my marked up drawing, if that will help you.
I would, I'd appreciate it. That'd be great, sir.
Who did this elevation for you?
That was the draftsman that they've got at Davtech Windows, who would be a contractor that we would use on this one.
Well, I would just echo what seem to be the two issues. Number one is the ADA access to the apartment door, and from a code standpoint, and also then from a design standpoint and historic standpoint, the angled inset to the shop door. I mean, that was originally to increase the visibility of the show windows, the merchandise in the show windows, and also so you don't have a tunnel effect going in.
Sure.
So it's a more welcoming entrance
Sure.
to a store. So if it's possible to do that, I think that's important.
No, I agree. I agree.
And I think you could get rid of some of the cross mullions as well. And to me, it didn't seem like the glass was excessively sized, if you do that.
If particularly, I think that would be the case, drawing back to your knee wall comment, if we're able to increase the height of that just slightly, that obviously takes some of the height out of the glass. And then we can solve to a sweet spot where we don't need some of that. You bet.
And what would the knee wall be faced with?
Typically, I've had the thought, Yeah, and I don't think it necessarily fits with the historic look, and so I would take your input on it, going back to your brick comment. I've seen a couple in town done very nicely where you just match the brick, and so you make that knee wall tie in with the brick. But that obviously wasn't how it was. And so I don't think it was wrapped with painted aluminum material, obviously, in the past, but something like that. And so I think that's probably what we would use to get to the closest look, and unless you folks would suggest that we do something that tied back in with the brick. But there's a few buildings around town where I've thought they did that very nicely, where they tied the brick of the building back in with the knee wall, but that doesn't technically fit with the historic look of it, so we'd probably just wrap it.
It's the only, if I were to design it, I would build or use something that's going to be durable to resist any
Sure,
shovels and
sure.
passing by. That said, no break shape, because that's going to
Right.
damage.
Right.
Any other comments?
Just to clarify something, Michael, regarding the comment about the angled entry, you know, if we include the clearances for ADA on that door, are we going to be moving the corners out to accommodate an angle plus, you know, 12 or 18 inches for the approach adjacent to the door? So essentially that'll get wider. Is that right? I'm thinking about it that way?
I don't think that are you talking about the plane at the door?
Yes.
Where the door is located?
Right. So if we include, you know, a plane at the door, do allow for the ADA approach, but then have an angled,
Yeah.
you know, have it chamfered back to that plane, we're minimizing that 6'9" measurement of the storefront?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
So it's
you
just a
have to-
consideration to,
Either that or you narrow up the entrance,
sure.
because I think you could take that down to 4.5
Yeah, yeah.
feet roughly
Yep.
to be comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing to say that the door has to be centered on
Right.
that opening either.
We do have room there, to your point, to either play with the angle a tiny bit
Yep.
or shift it inside of that space, so.
Yeah, I think that's more forgiving than the amount of space that you've left for the stairway access.
I agree.
So to clarify, in our review and to put a vote to this is to deny today pending a
As
revision
presented.
as presented. We wouldn't conditionally approve it.
That would be my proposal, is to just deny it as presented and suggest that he get it redrawn with incorporating our suggestions, and then submit it to the staff, and the staff can contact us via email in order to expedite this process. And we can weigh in on it, and we should be able to get an answer back to you within a few days after we get it, so if that would help.
Yeah, it's, I serve at the pleasure, so to speak, so thanks for considering it, and if I could, if you'd be willing to share whatever markups, even if it's in longhand, I'd be interested to see that. And from my perspective, no problem to get it redrawn. The picture, and so I see a mistake that he made, but the one that we're emulating, so to speak, over on Main Avenue does have that angle. And so it was a miss, and so no problem getting it redrawn. And I'd be grateful if you could run it through on the email, so I don't need to take up more of your time on the next session.
Can I make a quick question? So with this side entrance, I'm asking the architects in the room here, how much additional space is going to be needed for that entrance rather than, it looks like a 3-foot thing? If you're adding,
12 inches on the pole side for clearance.
okay, so if we're adding 12 inches there and kind of recalibrating everything, that's going to put to the left of the main entrance right now, it's about 2 feet off from center to the left. And if you look at the original photo, that the top, it's basically bisected in half, and then there's 4 basic things. So I think it would look a lot more aesthetically pleasing if you could get that kind of to the left, there's that center or kind of main post. If you could line that with the center, I think that's just going to aesthetically look better. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, because you use your keystone as your,
Fill it in a quadrant.
Yeah, so you'd basically have 4 bays.
I understand what you're
Because,
saying.
I mean, if you shift over just a little bit, you're going to end up with something on the left side of that door that lines it up like
Almost.
6 inches to the left of where the center of the building is. So, just a,
Maybe DavTech isn't the one to do the rendering.
so just an observation.
I would say, though, that that's the applicant's choice.
Oh, I understand that, but
Yeah.
didn't serve him very well this time.
It just sounds like there was some communication issues there. I think we can rectify that.
Yeah, I guess that would be my question for you all, absent the miss on the drawing, and I appreciate the comment, ma'am. Is the project in line with what we all hope to accomplish for downtown? That's what we're after. We're invested on the block and trying to make things better. So to me, this is part of the process, and I appreciate the input, especially since we got a bunch of architects in here.
I do appreciate your, the spirit behind what you've proposed. And please keep in mind that we're just trying to help you make it a little better, not dictate how you go about doing it.
No, I get it, and I'm appreciative.
Okay. All right. Is there a motion? Anybody care to make a motion?
I make a motion to approve the application as submitted.
Or to deny as submitted.
Don't we approve it as and then deny it in the vote?
No, you can make the motion.
To deny.
Yep.
I make a motion to deny the application as submitted.
I second.
Any further comment or clarifications?
I'd like to bring one last detail up. Do we want to have any consideration to the lintel above the glazing? I mean, we don't know what that looks like, obviously, because we have a sign there, but based on the original photo and the one that's superimposed, we're seeing some sort of head casing that's tying into the storefront.
Thanks for bringing it up. And I'm open to any input. When we did the one that we did, Big Blue, Mr. Money here on Broadway, we had the same thing. We didn't know what we were going to find. And we found it intact and just a little scarred up and rusty. And so we just dried it on it and painted it up and tied it in aesthetically the best we could. It doesn't match, obviously, perfectly because it's different metal, but you can't tell unless you're right on it. And so that, I would assume that we would run into the same thing. I would assume that it's been up there and taken a little
Yep.
water,
Okay.
probably.
Okay. Yeah,
And
so you're
that-
just filling in below, essentially. I mean,
Yeah,
best case scenario.
No, in a perfect world, we would tie right up to it.
Okay.
But then paint it and
Okay.
class it up in the process.
Yep. So it's not part of the new system, essentially. I mean, that's the hope.
Yeah, and I wouldn't expect that it needs to be. I don't, we've done one project on an interior where we got into that and opened up 2 walls essentially between 2 buildings. I don't like to mess with that, frankly, if we don't
Yep.
need to.
No,
That's
absolutely.
heavy stuff, and it's settled in tight, I'm sure.
Okay.
That's pretty typical, too, that the old storefronts are put together that way. So,
Does that work for everybody, if it's just cleaned up and?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Match?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay.
You know, one other thing I think on the elevation that would be somewhat helpful is to give us a little bit more of the true elevation, showing the brick extents of the building width, so you can see how this framing system basically will look in relation to what's existing with the masonry, and then also include that steel beam.
What about the windows as well, Michael? Do you think that would help, just the first, the second floor essentially?
No, I don't think that would be necessary, because that's not part of this focus, as I understand it.
Okay.
Because I did make a note, though, do you have plans to address those in the future?
The upstairs windows? Yeah, the conversation I had with Jasmine and you folks is we wanted to keep the project, since we'd be certainly spending the dollars that would eat up the grant level, to a single level.
Sure.
And I'm also sensitive to the schedule that you all have outlined, and so the less I can do in the January and February timeframe, the better. And it was indicated to us you wanted it done in your year for this project. And so I'd prefer not to do that with my apartment tenants upstairs in the winter. But yeah, at a minimum, we want to tie it in color-wise. I don't know if I'd go with, I don't know the terminology, but the mutton bars necessarily that they've got in the upstairs windows. I don't think those were original in this 1954 photo from a real tough negative that I've seen on another one. But yeah, we would, I guess could use an example as the best description. On the building immediately to the south, we did the storefront, and then a year later, that one's got windows on 3 sides, both facing 8th Street and then facing First Avenue South, and we replaced all of those. It's, to be candid, a budget issue as much as anything when you get into these old deals.
I guess I wasn't asking for that kind of an explanation, because I understood what your focus is here. But what I was going to just add is that if you do get around to replacing those windows up above it, that you pay some attention to the historic aspects of it.
Sure, sure.
So that's sort of an aside comment. All right, we have a motion on the floor. Any further discussion? So there's an understanding that you will provide an updated drawing to staff, who in turn will submit it to us via email for our review and response in the interim between now and next month's meeting, correct? Okay. All right, let's vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you all for your consideration and your input, more importantly.
Thank you, Joel.
You bet.
Keep up the good work.
Thanks.
All right. Next items on the agenda are the liaison reports. Planning Commission, any updates?
Well, I did review the Roars development in the Roosevelt neighborhood has continued to draw considerable coverage, and to the extent that it's relevant to our interests as a preservation commission. That neighborhood was galvanized by a challenge to their environments, and to the extent that they've asked for our support, it's not been forthcoming. They don't have a recognized historic neighborhood association, but I think we should be aware of that. And I would encourage you to look at the Planning Commission minutes of their last meeting when Roars pulled back some of their development plans, scaled them down a little bit. But I think that's something we should be cognizant of.
Specifically, what project
It's on, is it 12th?
It's for the Newman, it's where the Newman Center is.
The Newman Center, 12th and the University.
Oh, sure.
It's between, yeah, between University, 12th Street, 12th Avenue, and 11th Avenue, so it's the entire city block.
Mm.
And there was a pretty aggressive plan for
I believe 5 stories.
Yeah.
Were right across from residential homes. So there was some discussions in the neighborhood. Mhm.
I think that's a good suggestion, thank you. And we should be able to go online and,
It's all of, it's just
See
like
those
our,
minutes.
just like our minutes and agendas are available online. If you look through the City of Fargo, through the Planning Commission, you'll see the meetings of their last minute show the amended plans as well as the previously submitted plans. It was a victory for a neighborhood association that has yet to be recognized.
So you said that it was previously a 5-story whole block. What is it now?
Well, it wasn't the whole city block, it was the southern half of the block that was 5 stories. The north side of the blocks had a new Newman Center, new church, and then sort of a rectory, and then I believe 3-story Catholic student housing for that side of the block, and then the south side of the block was the 5-story. And then kind of a parking lot in the middle.
Yeah, it wasn't a town square.
Not quite.
so what happened at the meeting then? Did it get tabled or denied or?
Well, Roy's met with the representatives of the neighborhood, and I think they have taken down on the south end.
Yes, that's my understanding. I haven't seen the new plans, but
Yeah.
you're through the Roosevelt grapevine.
Yeah.
Board of Adjustment, Matthew?
We have not met.
Okay. House moving?
Has not met.
How about housing rehab?
Has not met.
Renaissance Authority, any updates from them? No?
No, there's, I don't believe it.
Okay. Any other business? The only thing that I can think of is that this is my last meeting. I'm not accepting another term. So I think this board will need to elect a chair and a vice chair.
Yes, that's correct.
So someone will have to nominate someone else. And in the interim, you will be able to, I'm sure the mayor will reach out, or somebody will reach out to other people in the community that will fill the vacancy. So, has any action been taken in that regard, as far as sending out inquiries of people that might be interested?
No, we were going to wait till after this meeting to see if you have a replacement chair. How they like to do it now is the chair will sit in on those meetings to make sure that the new commissioner is a good fit for the board, so.
Okay. All right. So we need a nomination first for chair, and then we'll handle vice chair after that.
Guess can we ask if there's any interest in the position?
Well, you need somebody to fill in for me, because I'm not going to be here.
There's a need.
Well, at least in the interim, I would nominate Heather Fisher to be the chair.
A second.
Any discussion?
I think Heather would be an excellent chair.
I think they'll do a great job.
No, thanks.
Okay, so we should vote on that. So all in favor of the motion as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, we also should elect a vice chair in the event the chair is absent. So is there a nomination for that position?
I nominate
Oh.
You can nominate whoever you like.
Or don't like.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Is there a second to that motion?
A second?
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you. Okay. Well, hearing that, the next meeting is scheduled for November 20th, and I'm sure everybody will do a great job here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for serving.
You're welcome.